My name is Scott Ford. I'm an exhibitor as well as one of the organizers of Prairie Comics Festival. My pronouns are he, him. And yeah, I have dabbled briefly in horror with my first comic 12 years ago. It was sort of action horror, extremely Mike Mignola inspired. And that is my main forte into making it myself. I'm a huge fan of horror comics as well as horror in film particularly. And I'm in the process right now of working on a more straightforward horror, slice of life kind of story. And I'm very interested to talk to all these folks about what they think about horror as well. So why don't we pass down the table and as well to introduce yourselves. Yeah.
I'm Carroll, or M, you can call me. Pronouns are they, them. I have been making comics for about 14 years, mostly horror. I do a lot of web comics that are on my site, dmcarroll.com. They're all free. And I've also done several graphic novels, short stories, short horror stories. Most recently, I had a book called A Guest in the House that came out last summer, which is my long-form graphic novel, which is like a psychological horror. And yeah, I'm also just a huge horror fan, movies, comics, whatever. So I'm also thrilled to be here. So thanks.
My name is Amanda Holmes. This is my first time at a festival, so I'm very excited to be here. I'm tabling, of course. I have a webcomic called Fruit Rot that I've always described as kind of horror. Jordan was so kind to be like, no, I would say that it's horror. So I was like, thank you very much. I do appreciate that. But I've always been a horror fan for a long time. Also, horror films as well, horror comics and everything. I think it's such a fascinating genre, so I'm very excited to be talking about it today.
Oh, hi. I'm Dela Cruz. I've been a storyboard artist in the animation industry for a couple of years, but now I do comics. And a side project that I have is called Animeers. I have it at my table, and it's Filipino mythology with eldritch horror. Right now it's a little bit horror and comedy, but it'll become serious later on. And I've always loved horror films, and I'm starting to read more horror comics. So I'd like to see how the two fields come together and what they can do.
Hi, I'm Jordan Patrick Finn. I'm a comic writer from nearby Toronto. Maybe it was Oshawa. Every time I bring that up, people are like, "Oh yeah, I've heard that." That's where I'm living. I've been writing comics for 15 years, maybe. I started, as I think Scott did, with making Mike Mignola inspired short comics about a detective solving Lovecraftian mysteries called Hellcraft, which is a black and white book that I've compiled into a 100-page graphic novel at my table. I did 4 issues of that, so combined it's a solid book. I've done another Lovecraftian-inspired samurai horror book called Death Kanji that I think is pretty popular. That's the one that people know me for. Other than that, I've done a bunch of short comics. A lot of them are horror, some of them have been comedy, fantasy, but I'm also, as everyone is up here, a huge fan of horror comics, movies, TV, podcasts, whatever. Horror in all mediums, I think, is very interesting, and it's fun to think about and talk about what each medium excels at compared to how horror fits into all of them.
Great. Yeah, thank you everyone for being here. Now, yeah, we can kick off just sort of a discussion. Anyone can answer, hop in if they have something to add. It doesn't have to necessarily have to go down the table in turn. But the first question I had, that honestly this could take up the whole panel, is what I am personally fascinated in, and I think a lot of other folks are as well, is how horror in comics differs from horror in other media. And if I'm being 100% honest, I love horror comics, but I think if I'm really being truthful, my favorite moments from horror as an overall genre do come from film, from me personally, but I'm very interested in how those mediums blend together, or with horror video games also being extremely interesting and different from that. And so, yeah, how do you folks feel that horror comics can use that genre differently than other mediums, or vice versa? And where, you know, the mediums start to blend in between. Yeah, does any folks have any thoughts on
I think Kat has an answer for that.
that? Yeah.
I really love horror films, especially not very jump scary stuff. My favorites is psychological horror, and I love scenes that are like really drawn out, and it's more about the atmosphere and then maybe some sound. And I find with having started horror comics is that the pacing is different to how you do in film. And because in comics you're constricted to your page, obviously, and film is time. And so you're gonna have to like use a number of panels to show like something that's slow or atmosphere, so corners around the room. And kind of like what Scott said, is like I really like film because it really gets me into that mindset of like horror. But something that I've like in the last couple of years have also, and you guys might know about it too, is like squirrel comics. And I find that it's kind of a in between.
Like webtoon?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
webtoon, vertical scroll. I find that it's like a little bit in between film and traditional because what film has and webtoon comics has is like you are in the moment and you can see things one at a time. Whereas like traditional comics, you need to utilize the page turn for like something you're like trying to build up suspense. And when you turn the page, you're like, whoa. And it's just, that's something I want to play with, and I haven't too much yet. Oh, and my friend used to read this webtoon years ago, and it would take over your screen and scroll for you.
That's interesting, and the talking about time and pacing in comics versus film is something that I'm thinking about across all genres. But another aspect that I think comics do better than film, and I think horror can take advantage of, is that you control the pacing. That personal, the chronology of time is up to you, the reader, progressing it and lingering on moments, or like quickly turning the page through moments to see what happens next is up to you. That reader agency, I think, is very interesting.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and not just reader agency. That's funny you chose that word because the word I was thinking of was complicity.
Yes. Complacency.
Yeah, because just like the idea of I also play a lot of horror games, and one of the things that makes horror games so scary is that the things that occur in the game are happening because you're doing
you have to walk down that
whatever
path.
inputs, right?
Yeah.
And then so you have to turn that page or not, or put the book down. It's this physical object taking up space. And the other thing, just to go back to what Kat was saying about turning the page and how films work in time. One thing that I found with making comics in particular is that you can't do that is specific to comics is that not only can the reader turn the page as they like, but they can go back in time very quickly and like compare notes on something very quickly.
As opposed to like rewinding a movie.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, what point was that at or whatever? But like just like flipping back and checking out a page and flipping back. So if you want to play with perception, either the characters or the readers, you have to know that at any point they can go back in time and check something. Whereas in a movie or something else, you can
sort of use that.
Yeah, exactly.
Be aware of that tool and repeat the same panel but change something, and then the reader can go, wait a second.
Yeah, exactly. And like that, I've done stuff like that, and I think that's part of what appeals to me about comics generally is that they can feel like puzzles that you're solving. And that's why so it doesn't necessarily feel like the limitations of a medium. It feels like problem solving.
It's interesting you bringing up video games compared to that, because I honestly hadn't thought about that till now, that like wait, what was down that hallway? Physically controlling a character in video games compared to what you're just talking about. Like, wait, what was on that last page? Is it different than now? Are we comparing? How scenes are different. Was there something in that corner? Was there a detail or a note that a character was looking at that now gives clues to scenes that are happening now? That is the investigation element is interesting.
I think that it's interesting because comics really come across as this intersection almost of film and
Yes,
novels, like this sort of a literary storytelling, in the sense that you have both the visual and the narrative aspect of just physically having the book, turning the pages and whatnot. And so it's more self-directed, right? So you can do that, but then you have that visual element. And you mentioned the scroll comics, which that's a really good point. That's something that really can only exist in that digital space, easily at least. And when you're scrolling, and then you can have that jump scare that's it's more film-like. It's almost like you're looking at a film strip, scrolling down a film strip in a way, especially if it's more cinematically, thumbnail, I guess, sketched out. I'm very inspired by filmmaking and storyboarding and stuff. I have a couple of film classes under my belt, but nothing like a full 2D animator. And so I'm definitely a lot more inspired by stuff like that. In fact, I'll I have a bad habit of inserting more and more panels. I'll be like, well, one panel works well, but why don't I triple my work and make it into 3 panels?
And then your 2 pages becomes 10 pages.
Oh, exactly.
I know it. Oh, yeah.
I do that all the time too, because my wife will come in, who's my informal editor, will come in and read through my work and be like, this is moving too fast.
Yeah.
So even though you can't necessarily control how long anyone's going to look at any given panel, she's like, you should just put in some stuff here to do what you can to throw up.
You gotta get the tone right. It's okay, this part you're supposed to read fast, but you just need to know it. You need to get it.
Yeah.
This part you read slow. This one is, and adding more panels can really force that slower sort of.
It's like a buffer zone.
Yeah.
Kind of between events, and it's interesting talking about how pacing is directed at your own pace. You can skim through the whole book as fast as you want. But then trying to direct that yourself through sequences of panels, through panel shapes, through panel composition of I get the feeling that this is slower. And also talking about webtoons and webcomics, that the page composition versus something that is individually panel scrolling, I think is also huge in the printed format that when taken advantage of is so incredible to see. It's not just about this one panel, this one moment, but how that is reflected to the page as a whole. And in horror, where you have a sequence of events and then you have a panel of a character just I don't know, smiling at something, but juxtaposed with everything, all the panels next to it, of that has a whole different tone within the page composition.
It's when you have a character smiling, and then them still smiling and still smiling, and you have that. It lingers on the moment more, which really just ramps up the tone.
Oh, this person's okay. Oh, this.
Why am I supposed to be paying so much attention to this? Why is the author drawing my attention to this so much? It's kind of eerie. It's uncanny in a way. It's like a long take almost in filmmaking when, the camera lingers on something for a lot longer than it should, and it's this feels uncomfortable. I want to look away, but I can't, right? And so I think that's a really good example of how, comics kind of reflect that filmmaking technique, really. It's interesting stuff. I'm ooh, ideas for my next comic.
Did folks have any other?
I can add it. I want to say something about jump scares. Where
Please jump.
in comics, it's you can't really do jump scares, right? Because how do you do that? In film, you have something suddenly.
We always try. Let's be honest. We always try.
Yeah. What do? You put it hidden on the right side of the page, then as soon as somebody turns the page, they go,
Yeah,
oh, well, there's the thing.
You
Okay,
do one
I'll
of
get
those like
there.
cards where you open it and it plays like a sound. Happy birthday, but instead it's like
Or like
Full
Follow dude pop-up
Yeah,
look.
the
Pop-up book, yeah.
Yeah.
You could do it on a
Oh,
page
wow.
turn, but then everybody's expecting something on a
Yeah.
page turn. So
Yeah.
it's
My technique has always been the last panel before the page turn. I try to make a very small panel.
Yeah.
So it's like so there,
like
and then the
don't
next
catch
page
it
is
when
maybe
they-
a full page spread.
Yeah.
So not only is there like a jump scare of like something actually coming at you through the page, but the juxtaposition of small moment versus large moment. That's just a little
I thought maybe about burying jump scares in something that you don't immediately see when you flip the page, which is like a block of text. Like just somehow hide some real scary dialogue in the middle of a sentence or something, and then, as soon as a reader turns the page, they won't see it, they'll see, oh, there's a block of text. And then when they finally get to reading it, maybe that's an effective way to do that.
That is interesting.
But I also don't really like to write blocks of text. It's not really the strength of what comics do usually.
That's the jump scare is, oh no, this page is just a block.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
sometimes it feels that way when you're reading and it's like, oh, this
Yeah.
comic's good, but it's okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
I read all that.
Oh, I'm gonna go do something else right now.
Yeah.
Classic jump scare response.
Yeah.
I was gonna say too, in the Stephen King, his book about horror writing, Danse Macabre, he talks about horror in novels and horror in radio, and this was written a while ago, and horror in movies. And he doesn't talk about horror in comics, but I do think about it because he talks about how like in a novel you could be like, and he opened the door and the most huge cockroach he'd ever seen was on the other side. And that's up to the reader to decide how big that cockroach is. What to them is the hugest cockroach. So it could be 7 feet tall, it could be a foot long, whatever. But then in film, you actually have to show that. And so the viewer might have time to be like, oh, it's not that big. Like, I would have pictured something bigger. And in comics, so like you have to like, you're bound by the physical constraints of a movie or whatever effects you can do, I guess, the limits of your technology and budget. But in comics, it's like the limits of your actual like drawing skill and imagination. So you could technically like draw anything you want. And I find that to be like one of the liberating things for comics for me is that I can just like I don't have to worry about like the budget going into my monster design or like my effects because
Absolutely.
it's just up to me and like what I can push and whatever tools I have to me to, make something scary.
Being in comics is like you're a director with an unlimited budget,
Yeah.
as long as you can draw it.
Yeah, you just need the skill.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
Comics are really all-
Yeah.
Or you won't have a comedic moment of something that takes someone out and like, that's a bad effect.
Yes,
When you're watching a good movie and the monster is like terrible.
It's a guy in a costume.
That looks like
That's not a flaw.
Yeah.
Unless you really just.
Yeah, they'd be like, this perspective is
You're
real.
thinking a different style than you normally would.
Yeah, it's a lot more intentional when you're drawing it.
It's just one thing we don't really have to worry about is a bad effect. You're kind of ruining the mood.
But then I think of techniques of like breaking the panel boundary of like this cockroach was the biggest cockroach you've ever seen and contained within a film screen of like that's still within your TV or on in the cinema, but like on a comic, if you're going panel by panel by panel and suddenly this cockroach that should be contained within its own panel is literally breaking out of those borders. Like that's, especially if you haven't done that technique before, that can be really shocking.
Yeah, I think that's a really big thing that comics can do really well that maybe other mediums struggle with a little bit more, is just how, like, maybe not struggle with, but like having that consistency in the art and then just breaking it. I think that's one of the best ways to really get a jump scare across in a comic, is to really like, break the limits of what you've shown. It's kind of like how, you might be watching a movie or comic or, something like that, and, something happens where it's like the comic is like really like gory or intense or something. And it's like, okay, this is like normal, this is part of the comic. But in a comic that doesn't have that at all, like then somebody getting hurt and there's blood and it's like, oh my God, it's like that could be incredibly freaky just because of what the comic is. And I think that that's another really good way. I think that that's something that I've really done in my comic Fruit Rot.
I was to say that, but you've done that really well with your
Thank you. Is it really dwells on like social anxiety horror and body horror, which I think goes kind of hand in hand in a lot of ways. Just sort of the idea of being perceived as a human, like, oh my God, you're looking at me. Oh, please don't. Like, I can't help being the way I am. It's just how I am. And sort of the Fruit Rot is about sort of like a young man who's turning into a creature. And sort of losing that like humanity that he always thought he once had. And sort of in doing that, it really just ramps it up. It starts out very normal. He's going to school, he's going to university, and then things kind of start to change. They start to become weird. Things start happening. He's losing time and everything. And there's one panel that or one sort of part where, it's sort of this whole sequence where he's losing his mind. He's kind of like out of nowhere, and then he wakes up and everybody is staring at him because he just hurt one of the other characters really badly. And he doesn't know what happened. He doesn't know what to think. It's literally like that meme where everybody has like a drink and they're looking at him like, ugh. And it's like, that's literally what it is. I think it's like, it's kind of funny drawing it, but it's like, it's an intense moment. And it's one of those things where it's like, oh my God, like, I'm sorry for being the way I am. I don't know what happened. And I think that that's really powerful. I've seen maybe some stuff explored, but like that in other pieces, but I think that that's something that is really worth exploring, especially since I think most people have some level of social anxiety where they're like, oh my God, I like public speaking. Not everybody likes public speaking, so I'm sure some people can at least relate to that.
Certainly us comic creators can relate to that.
Not me.
Yeah.
Totally easy.
Pulled up in our various studio dungeons where we're living.
Yeah.
We have to do a show.
Yeah.
Talk to people all day long.
Yes, the juxtaposition of spending months in entire isolation working on this thing, and now for 2 days straight, I need to talk to hundreds of people is wild.
You're walking out of the basement
Yes.
like, here's what I made.
Yes, things like that, yes.
Oh, I was gonna say, just before we move off from different mediums of horror, I was talking to Amanda earlier about her doll making, and I know Kat, you do BGD dolls. I was thinking, one of the things I like about comics, because I do webcomics too, but one of the things I like about physical comics is, as a kid, there were certain physical items and like books, like in my case it was like this one Dr. Seuss treasury that had a scary, what I thought was scary, in it. And you could see the band of color from the pages was like dark blue in that book, and I would always flip to avoid seeing that story ever. And I know my wife, there's like certain comic books, Beautiful Darkness was one of them, where she was like, I do not want this book in the house. Like, it's just like, it gives bad vibes, I don't want this book in the house. And I was talking to Amanda about like, when it comes to like dolls, have you ever made dolls influenced by horror in the, like, where they kind of can take on, it's not just the way the doll looks, but the actual object itself can become an object of like dread and horror, and that would be a cool medium for horror too. And so when I think about like horror books that I really like, it's always just like, this object that you want to just hide under the bed or something.
Those are the kind of books I want to make.
Yeah.
I think my next one's just gonna be like a hardcover though, cover of dust before I say it. Spooky book that you found in the attic.
I think that's a really good point about comics, specifically printed comics, which is why that even though I love and I'm very influenced by film and influenced by video games, I continue to make comics and continue to make comics in print specifically, is that it is this object, it is this personal, like intimate experience of reading this object that is only containing this story.
Mm-hmm.
It's not on a TV where I can turn it off or change the channel or do something else. It's not on my phone that is just one of a bazillion apps or websites that I can visit. This is this object, this is this story, and it will always be this object in this story as like, and as just a personal experience, one-on-one with that object, reading it. You're not in a theater with people, you're not on the couch watching this thing, is, I think, extremely powerful and can really lend itself to that personal horror experience that.
With that, we have had a good sentence in my head and it went away. So we have access to one of the senses that the other mediums don't, in touch, right? Like you're touching and holding a book, you're not touching a movie. Hopefully not. And I'm interested in trying to explore that. I don't know, you could do it in a really gimmicky way with text on a
Fun
page.
feel, like learning,
Yeah,
like this is what
I'd
Reddit's
like to see a better way, but something I
That
probably.
It starts out like this is rabbit fur, and then it's like this is
Jay.
It's
Yeah.
like goopy.
This is blood soaked.
Yeah,
printed
The book comes in a Ziploc and it's kind of leaky.
Oh, God.
I wanted to mess around with like having to turn page, like flip the book around when you go inverted certain comics. Like in Sandman's a pretty famous one where like you're reading it, you turn the book and read it upside down for a little while. Or I know you've done the one that's horizontal, right?
Yes.
A landscape comic.
The 14 comic.
I don't know the name of it, but I've
Science
seen it.
fiction, yes.
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 So I think that's we have a sense that none of the other mediums can access. That I think a lot of us should be trying to mess around with.
Yeah, absolutely.
I also think one thing that I always forget is like how important lettering is. That's a whole skill set together, but like I think with horror especially, you can do some crazy stuff with lettering and incorporate it into the artwork. And that's something like I would like to get better at too. And but sometimes I forget it's like a completely other job. And that's why it's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of those things you don't think is very hard until you do it and you're like, oh my God, can I hire somebody?
And very different from like printed prose that's just, text, or the subtitles in a movie where changing fonts around and changing, the character of those letters to communicate, maybe a growing sense of dread or something like that. One of my favorite personal techniques is I love to set rules for myself for my books of like, I'm gonna do it in this format, I'm gonna use this font, and I'm only gonna have this many panels per page, just for a sense of consistency. And then I love one moment to break those rules that throws you off guard of like, why is this a different font? Why is this making me feel a little different? Why is this page now crowded with panels when there's only been 4 panels per page leading up to now? And I think changing those formats again, when like film is, subtitles are one all been pretty standard, made to be neutral and not have character in them, and text can have that character in them.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because like having text balloons and stuff like that, word balloons, that is something that is so unique to comics. Like there really isn't any other medium that really
Like,
does
I've
that.
seen some novels do like some weird stuff, but like it's not really
Those
like
leaves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really, so many ideas.
Yeah, we're all gonna go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, exactly. I'm gonna go home like, okay, I have so much stuff to work on now.
Jordan, you remind me of actually a really interesting moment that from a comic that, like, I'm not like a huge like mainstream superhero fan, but I do have this one Batman comic from like, I don't know, 8 years ago or whatever, from the House of Owls series.
Snyder's Court of Owls.
Court of Owls, yes.
I went to the library and got that just because I knew it was a big
Yes,
thing.
there's a moment, spoilers for Batman Court of Owls from like 10 years ago. There's a moment when he's trapped in this maze and he's like so dehydrated, and there's just this one fountain in the middle of the maze, and he's just like, I'm gonna drink this water, and it's like it's laced with something, and he starts going crazy. And then as he's sort of losing his mind, you start turning the pages and the book is turning. And then the next page it turns again, and it gets to a point where you are fully reading the book upside down.
And
Before
right,
going,
and then you have to flip the page.
and then going back to normal once he starts coming down from whatever he's been poisoned by, you're like, you are as disoriented as he is of like which way was up again now to read it normally.
And my next book will do something like that. And I had a short that didn't get finished, but I want to go invert it so bad. It's so much fun.
Yeah.
It's so much
Yeah.
fun. The first time you read a book like that, it's like, whoa, you can do that?
Yeah, and it's so specific to that printed medium.
Yes, exactly.
Well,
Kathy?
Oh no, I hadn't thought about that and I want to try it.
Yeah, all our books are going to be upside down. I guess now, I mean, we've talked a bit about our own work and stuff, and I don't know if folks have more to add about like what they're interested in exploring next in their own comics going forward. We've all just given each other a bunch of ideas, but also are there any other specific examples of horror comics that you love that maybe people aren't aware of as much, or maybe a horror moment in a non-horror comic that, wow, this was powerful and unexpected and a standout moment of both the comics medium and the horror genre that you'd like to highlight. So yeah, if you want to talk about your own work or other work, Beautiful Darkness.
Yeah, I was just going to say Beautiful Darkness.
Beautiful Darkness is a it is a wild. It is an extremely depressing
Yeah, it's a bit nihilistic.
book, and I guess my elevator pitch that is it's like it is a story about like little characters in a big world, like small people that are only about yay high, like the Borrowers, or
they're silly.
or
Yeah.
but then you find that they are inhabiting the body of a little girl that is lying on the forest floor.
Yeah.
And decaying.
Yeah.
Oh, decaying panel by panel.
Yeah.
And it is extremely
But they're having their
depressing.
own little story.
Yeah, like a little.
They are. They're having
Yeah,
a
they're-
good time.
Yeah.
And it is.
They're having a silly little story. But like that uses like shocks of like the violence in it quite effectively. And it's
Yes.
all beautifully watercolored and stuff. I was gonna mention that one, and then I was also gonna mention all this month there's this thing online called Shortbox Comics Fair, which Shortbox was a publisher based out of the UK, run by Zainab Akhtar, and she curates beautiful work. But anyway, all through this month, there's a website online where you can buy PDFs of all these brand new comics. And I've read a couple. There are a few horror comics on there, and one that I would recommend is by Val Wise, called In Fair Verona, and it's sort of like an erotic horror comic. It's bizarre, but it like completely. I loved it. I read it right before coming out here, and I was like, oh, like this also makes me want to like make stuff. So I would recommend In Fair Verona, which just came out. So.
Yeah. We were talking about Berserk in the elevator.
Yeah, I'm wearing.
Which is horrific.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
That's it. Like that. I do read like a lot of like horror manga and stuff like that. Berserk for its art does like incredibly great monster designs, lots of emotional horror, and along with just physical horror.
Yes.
That's been a big influence on me, I think, the past few years especially. But yeah, got the new Junji Ito collection.
Junji Ito, like, how have we gone this long into a horror comic?
Well, when you said
Junji
comics,
Ito, yeah.
comics that we really like, and I was like, oh, Junji Ito, and then you're like, that maybe people don't know about. I'm like, not Junji Ito.
No, we can talk about Junji Ito. I mean,
Yeah.
the new Uzumaki anime just came out, and I've heard good things about
Right,
it, and I'm excited
yeah.
to have people look at that when I have a chance. My favorite Junji Ito story specifically that I think not a lot of people bring up alongside his work is the Town Without Streets, or it's not, I might be misremembering the name of it. It's one of his short comics, part of an anthology. I think it's called The Town Without Streets, and it is a strangely subtle comic for him, and I think that's why it's one of my favorites. But yeah, feel free.
I mean, just on the topic of Junji Ito, the first one I think I read by him was The Enigma of Amagara Fault,
Yes.
which I think is
Yes.
probably one of the most well-known, maybe?
I feel like it kind of blew up briefly online,
yeah.
like people sharing.
That's where I read it
Yeah,
initially.
same.
And then I was like, okay, I need
Yeah.
to explore this guy's
Same,
entire
yeah.
work. And one thing that I think I really love about Junji Ito's work is just how how contained each of his works are, but also how ambiguous everything is. Like the Enigma of Amigara Fault, for those who don't know, it's on a cliffside, a bunch of human-shaped holes appear, and people start getting drawn to them, seeing it, on TV, online, whatever, and they're like, "This is my hole," and they enter the hole, and everybody's like, "What is
And they don't come out.
They don't come out, and so people are disappearing, and it's really weird, and there's no reason behind it given, and I don't know if I want to spoil the end. It's worth reading.
No, yeah, I would leave that
Yeah.
open. It's a good one.
But the ending, it doesn't reveal anything about, there's no lore, there's no backstory. It's
Yeah.
not a reference to any kind of folklore or thing that came before it. It's just a horrifying event where these holes appear. This is my hole, I need to enter this, just feeling that to your core. And I love the ambiguity behind just, what is going on? What is this? Why? And
Over explaining stuff is the death of horror to me.
oh yeah, exactly. And that's one of the things I think he's really good at, is just most of it is just left as is. Oh, read it, you figure it out. Yeah.
It's always and that was a weird thing that happened.
Yeah.
Story. Isn't that nuts?
It's the Twilight Zone had episodes like that, that was weird.
Yeah, there's
anyway,
not-
I'm Rod Serling.
Yeah, or there's not necessarily a moral component to it. If you read old creepy comics, EC horror comics and stuff like that, which I read a lot as a kid, they're I went back and read a bunch more recently, and they're almost always about this thief thought he could get away with it, or this woman thought she could cheat. It's always a cheating wife, guy who kills his wife.
Or is okay with having something gruesome happen.
Yeah, and it's and
This
then,
is why you don't cheat on your man.
yeah.
Because, yeah.
And it's they're fine, they're fun, but you get to see the formula after a certain amount of time. And they do often feel more, I'm not an authority on them, so I haven't read every single one. They do often seem they have this moral message to them, and I think that's what's sort of interesting about Ito's work is that there's a lot of them are just fun. There's funny ones too, yeah, just kind of in and out, I guess. Drifting Classroom is another really great horror manga that has just sort of a nightmare scenario that just schools.
That's not
As it goes. No, it's
I never read that.
oh my god, I can't remember his name.
That's fine.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
Drifting
Drifting
Classrooms.
Classrooms.
Yeah.
What are your favorite horror comics?
Comics, well, right now, I mentioned it earlier, is Something's Killing the Children. I find that it calls to my storyboarding side. It's very cinematic in a way. They're very good at using panels to draw out a scene, just a shot of the eye or a shot of the hand or something like that. And they're very good at not using too many words. And sometimes I think about that because it's I need to get through this script and I have these many pages, and sometimes you just want to draw out a scene and you're well, now I'm 2 pages with that. So that's something I like to say. I also like the art style is very kind of sketchy.
I should have brought some paper. I want to write down all the names of these.
Yeah, this is recorded. So.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Other horror
Yeah,
comics.
jump in. Yeah.
I feel like nobody ever talks about Harrow County, but that was very good. It was 10 volumes or something. It's very good, and nobody has ever mentioned it to me. But it's good. Witches by Scott Snyder was really cool. The coloring by Matt Hollingsworth was really experimental. I thought that was really neat.
Yeah.
I don't know, a bunch of other horror comics. Necronauts by Fraser Irving. I forget the name of it. Wake. Nice House on the Lake is great.
Oh yeah, I was just
Nice House on the Lake. It's got such a generic name, but then they sort of experiment with it. Like Cabin in the Woods, the most generic movie name, but then it gets experimental.
It sounds quite mysterious. It's
Nice
quite
House on the Lake
intriguing.
is the same.
Yeah.
It's not the same thing, but it's the same vibe of here's something really generic. A bunch of teens go to a cottage, but then it becomes more interesting. You just can't reveal the interesting stuff, or then it and
Yeah.
it loses the charm completely, right?
Which is so hard, and that's just like, I feel like that's a struggle of maybe all genres, but like for horror particularly, when you want to have that shock. That shock would be so great to achieve and then not have something coming, that it would be so great if the reader picked this up thinking, this is just a, I don't know, slice of life story, or
Then-
Have the plot twist.
and then have that absolute just rug pull of like, oh no, this is dark and
If
freaky.
you're not advertising the rug pull,
Exactly.
people interested in
And then
getting
the
it in
people
the
who
first
do
place,
pick it
it's
up-
very hard to market horror.
Yeah.
Like, so some kid, like, oh, this is a
Oh, it's
little
like
silly
the red
fantasy
thing, and it's for
comic,
the wrong
like,
audience, right?
or Beautiful Darkness. Oh, this is
Yeah.
just about little, like, woman-like characters.
Yeah.
It is not.
No.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Doki Doki literature.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's such a peak example. It's one of the things. For those who don't know, it's kind of like a anime style visual novel dating sim, but then it takes a dark turn. And it's like, you look at it and it's like cute, anime characters, really fun. And then it's like the warnings are like, warning, horror, suicide, gore. It's like,
What am I getting?
what happens in this? Like, oh my god, okay. And it does get really dark, and it's one of those things where it's like, had you gone in, you would like not expecting it to be horror. You'd probably be like, well, what is this? I do not want this. But that's kind of a cool reaction. That's like, as a creator, it's kind of like, I don't want you to know it's gonna be scary.
Like, have you heard of Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared?
Yeah.
It's a short like YouTube series that was from like
Yes, I have.
Kickstarter.
Yeah, I did watch
But
this.
it looks like a children's show, like puppets and stuff. Like the art direction is like really cool, and there's like songs, but it starts to get really weird.
Yeah. Really surreal
Yeah.
and kind of like maybe a little gory, but more just like,
Just like
Puppets,
uncomfortable.
yeah,
Yeah.
like blood splatter puppets.
It sounds okay.
Thing that really stood out to me that I found out about it, I think during the campaign they had like a pilot, and there was like a number that was featured in the pilot that you could actually call, and it would be like a snuff film, but you could call that number and the characters would be like, help me.
Oh my goodness.
But that like stood out to me. I was just like, wow, I've never seen something decent.
Wow.
Fun.
Uh,
I
so
can put my
weird.
phone number in the next book and just say
Yeah,
help me
you're
every
fine.
time I answer the phone.
That's how I answer the phone.
Yeah.
Like, I'm calling for oh yeah, right, help.
So we have about 15 minutes left, and I do want to leave time for questions from the audience. But yeah, I guess lastly, where do you see yourselves exploring horror going forward? That's a big question. We're only 15 minutes left, so maybe try to be brief. How do you see yourself maybe overcoming some of the obstacles we talked about, or blending of genres or medium? Anything stands out to folks?
I think I'm really going to try and do some of the things that you all suggested.
Yeah.
Especially with,
Nice.
the upside down thing. But I find myself, because I was in animation, that like rules are very strict. It's like the characters can only stay on this side, and when they cross the axis, you need to like. And I find
Yes.
in comics you don't really have to do that. Of course, you want to do it to an extent, but that's something that like I'm looking forward to breaking the rules for.
The lettering is there
And
to
the
help
lettering,
sort of guide
yeah.
instead of crossing the line like film. Yeah, there's no rules. There's no rules in comics. You can do whatever the hell you want.
That's right.
I'm still just thinking. I don't want to give anything away at whatever. Like I said, I'll say that drawing wise, I do feel like very inspired by Berserk lately. Like I feel like I'm really. I don't know why I decided like I've turned 40. I should really get into hatching. Like I should really get into like laborious drawing. But that's true. So yeah, I just like pushing, experimenting, and having fun, problem solving.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm still so inspired. Just being here and, talking and everything, like, I'm like, ooh, that's a cool idea. I made a joke about having, like, opening a book and having to be like, boo, like a card that plays sound. But now I'm just kind of like,
Could you
We're
do
That's
We're
that?
looking up how much are
how much can
microchips to
you? No idea how you could go about doing
Oh,
that.
actually, you know when like a greeting card is like, you find it and it's old and the sound is like,
But just harvest
yeah.
that, and it's like, that's
Yeah.
scary enough as
Just
just
bulk
get a
buy
remix.
expired
Go to
everything.
the
Yeah.
reject pile for the Hallmark bin.
Go, yeah, exactly. Go to like the
It's like,
dumpster
go to
out
like the
back.
reject pile of the Hallmark
Yes.
bin, just get all the ones that aren't playing correctly.
Yes, yeah. Good, get it on discount.
And do a very, very limited print run.
Yeah.
It's $3, yeah, $200 per book, yeah. Do it. That's, I love it.
Don't give me ideas.
I do, yeah, I'm personally, I'm been slowly developing a slice of life horror comic for many, many years. That's kind
I
of,
wanted to ask about that. Slice of life horror sounds really interesting because it's just not something.
Yeah.
They're kind of
I-
antithetical.
I am, and again, being extremely inspired by film, and like I want to make something that feels less pulpy and more like I love Jordan Peele's work, and I'm trying to think of other recent examples. I really love the graphic novel Are You Listening? That is not strictly horror. It is a very touching road trip story between two women who kind of know each other tangentially through like friend of a friend, but not really, and then they end up sharing a car together on this road trip where you're not really sure where either of them are going. And is this, again, this very touching slice of life, but then people start following them and the road signs kind of stop making sense. And it is, I love that book. It does deal with some heavy subject matter. But yeah, I am interested in talking about like, yeah, where the unsuspecting genre turns of, I thought this was going to be kind of simple day-to-day, oh now this big thing happened that I didn't quite see coming. Yeah, again, which is why it's been like a back burner project for so long. Like I'm letting that cook. That is not something that I'm rushing to finish. And I am also really interested in exploring like, yeah, the visual mediums of like, maybe looking at GIF elements to like a digital comic format and things like that. Great.
Definitely eager to hear more about that. That sounds really cool.
I have had some write-ups on my Patreon that is not paywall. That is
Patreon.com.
Patreon.com/ScottAford. All my posts are free to read, and I do a monthly post of like, this is what I've been working on. And so I've got a few posts from a few months back of like, here's my very slow progress on my horror comic. Here's some like test sketches of like what I'm kind of stylistic tests of what I've been working on. But yeah, with 10 minutes left, I think thank you everyone here for your wonderful insight, and let's open it up to questions if there are any.
Somebody asked me something.
Yes, in the back.
I have a question about creature design.
Yes.
Just thinking about films and creature features where, it's like, don't show the creature. You kind of have to go through a movie and maybe you get a glimpse, and maybe near the end of the film you kind of see it, but again, it's that moment of movement and you can pause it, but it's not the same, whereas in a comic, it's like you can stop and you can stare and analyze that creature. So what's that process like, designing a creature that people are going to then look at for as long as they want?
For me, I have like a folder, inspiration folder of like just elements that I'm like, that looks gross. I should make a note of that for future use. So I'll just say that lately, in terms of if I want to create a character or a creature or whatever, I've been looking at like scanning electron microscope images of cells and things like that, really close-ups of like that sort of, where you can sort of gore up natural patterns, I think, brings up a level of disgust for me so much so it works. So that's usually what I go to, something like that. And often when you want to draw something really scary, it shouldn't necessarily be the realistic version of that thing, because, you know, if you're looking up like whatever horrible Google search I'm on to find whatever, how, you know, a corpse looks like this, I don't recommend doing this, but often the result is just like sad, because it's like a human being, whatever. So, and that won't work in the comics. So you have to like think of like what you would imagine that horrible thing looking like, rather than what it actually looks like. So that's what I usually. I don't go for like necessarily realism, but like what gross stuff can I drape this on? Yeah.
I think by nature of the medium being drawn versus film that is real people, or you know, if it's CG, it's attempting to look as realistic as possible. The nature of drawing just naturally being abstract by way of this is interpreting something from real life, I think adds to that better, that you can retain horror and still show a full creature design better than film, because that abstraction still exists. In my opinion, that you are still interpreting how this thing moves, or how this thing, you know, might you know, what its, you know, textures are, or what it might smell like, or I don't know, weird stuff like that. Yeah, again, by nature of the medium being drawn, I think that abstraction can lend itself to the horror in the way of the sort of fear of the unknown more than film. Yeah, but also like hiding stuff like behind panels, or like off like in the margins, or like again playing with the medium, I think can be like really fun, like interesting stuff.
I can jump in on that answer,
Yeah.
which is to answer you directly in terms of like how do you design this movie creature. I'm a writer, so I can't answer that super well, but I tend to use a lot of silhouette in my work and just say like, hey, don't show this thing, just show a shadow or something. Or there was one, speaking of the margin, hiding things in the margin of the comic, one of my issues of Hellcraft, the margins were the monster. And so he goes into this like lair underground in his tomb or whatever, and as he's going through this weird fiction stuff is happening. And as the pages are going, I asked the writer to sort of increase the gutters, so the pages are shrinking in and it's getting more claustrophobic, and then the gutters actually like reach out and start attacking.
That's really cool.
That's
really cool.
Yeah.
I was very happy with the way that turned out. So that's how you can design a monster. Is don't just say just nothing, just the pages attacking them, and hope it works.
I think another really good thing, and this is kind of speaks back to Beautiful Darkness is a really good example, is like dichotomy. If you draw all the characters as like really cute or really stylized or in a specific way, and then you have a monster that's like realistic or horrifying, or you could even reverse it, you know, you could do it any way, but like break the style, change stuff around and make it not just unexpected, but unexpected for what the work is, you know, because like, and that's something that like film does, like you can like stylize stuff. It's kind of like how you could have like cartoons with live action and stuff like that, but you can also do stuff like with that in comics and really push it, because you really are only limited by your scale, and even then, you know, you can just do whatever you want, right? And I think that like in Beautiful Darkness, they are all these really cutesy, they really do kind of remind me of like Moomin, and like a cute little style, or all the characters look all different, like running around like that, and then there is, you know, a rotting corpse in the forest, and that dichotomy to me is really unnerving. And I think that something like that is really neat. Like, how do you, like, you have like, you know, a blocky style, but then it's like, there's something that's like gooey and gross and icky, and just sort of putting those two styles together, I think can really like, at least personally, I think it turns out so cool when that happens, but that's also a really cool way of making people unnerved by what they're seeing on the page. So yeah, that's another thing too.
Yeah, so there is going to be another, so we do have to be out of here right at the schedule, but did you have a question in the front here?
Yeah, where can I find everyone online, whether website or social media?
Great question.
Yeah.
Great.
I'm Scott A41 on Instagram, is mainly where I post, or yeah, my Patreon completely free.
Patreon.com/Scott.
Right? It's free. I keep telling you it's free.
But there are.
It's just a newsletter. Basically just a newsletter. Yeah. Yes. Feel free to share your handles.
I just have my website. It's emcarroll, CARROLL.com. And yeah, there's just a whole bunch of comics there from like the last 10 years.
Awesome.
Comics and some art, fan art and stuff like that.
It's also all upstairs.
Yes, of course, of course. I am ahomesatelier.com. That's the same on Instagram as well, so you can find me there. AHOLMES atelier .com. That's probably the best way to find me.
You can find me at Minshi Arts, MINTSHII, .card.co. And it's the same for Twitter and Tumblr.
I have a web store, which is my name, jordanpatrickfinn.com. I kind of stopped posting on social media after Twitter turned into a garbage fire.
Yeah.
I'm either Jordan P. Finn or Jordan Patrick Finn everywhere, but it's a mess now, so who knows?
Oh, and also if you'd like to read my webcomic, that is fruitrot.com.
It's very good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I think that's all we have
Thank
time
you.
for. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you.